So, April 30th, 2015. The Ochelli Effect is live on UCY.TV radio. Of course, if you're catching this further on down the line, you can find the archives and the live show at ucy.tv/TOE. There's a bunch of stuff there that you can see nowadays, including the YouTube playlist links, all that kind of stuff, plus the MP3 downloads, and it is all much, much appreciated. Of course, I'm speaking to you tonight from the House of the Wounded because Francis just cut himself for the first time, so little Frankie is flipping out because I think that's the first time he's seen his own blood, and, well, you know, things happen. Little boys grab things they're not supposed to. So that happened about, just when, well, about 5 minutes before my intro started to play. So, this is what's going on. And Kim is back on the crutches. So, it's a fun house. Really is. Anyway, I want to thank Patricia Braunschwaller, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I'll probably thank her more than once for the recent donation, which also there is a donation button at ucy.tv/TOE. And I do thank every single one of you that does that. I will mention you on the air if you like, and I'm coming up with other ways to figure out how to thank people who do that, and some of that is also passed along to the network directly because, you know, after all, without this platform, this show doesn't exist as it does. So, that is what goes on. Anyway, interestingly, I'm being asked to speak about Jade Helm on some other radio stations, and it's kind of funny to me because I'm not the most knowledgeable guy on the subject, but I do see that there is a greater agenda which is happening here. There is a greater plan in play. We're watching the evolution of the nonsense which started, you know, seemingly in some people's minds in Ferguson, Missouri last year, of course, with the Michael Brown incident and the reemergence of the discussion over the militarized police state. This is all rather valid and perfect fodder for discussion, and of course with the emergence of the Jade Helm plan, as has been rumored and speculated about and everything else, you know, I'm not sure where to come down on it. I mean, it is a frightening situation, but when you kind of put it together with the unrest that's going on in the streets and, you know, the divide and conquer strategy still in effect among all of us, well, I had a lot to say about that on Tuesday, but of course, I'm still rather bothered by it. I don't know how how to really express myself about it anymore. I mean, I've got some thoughts and I'm working on a few things, and we shall see what it is that we discuss. And of course, I've invited people that do listen to me in the Maryland, well, in Maryland, in the Baltimore area, to come on. They don't even want to discuss what is happening there right now. But guys, you know who you are, and you listen to me there, and you are welcome to call in anytime. Of course, I'll also take other calls tonight. I didn't even bother to mention my guest yet. Chris Jackson Rojas, I believe is how you pronounce it, but he's one of these guys, a young guy actually, which came to my attention because Jules made me an admin on the Facebook page for UCY.TV, which, by the way, you can find that on Facebook along with the Ochelli Effect. I think the Ochelli Effect did like the UCY.TV page. I don't know, but she gave me one of those admin things, so I saw a message from this younger gentleman who was pretty much saying, hey, I want to come on to UCY and all that. And, of course, I'm not involved in that decision-making, process. But a guy who thought that it would be good for him to, to come onto the network and all that, I said, what the hell? Let's talk to him. Apparently, I think he's about 17. We're going to find out about that in a little bit. Told him to call me at about 5 after. Not sure where he is because we're right about at that time, aren't we? So, not sure where he is yet, but he will be calling in shortly, and we're going to have a discussion with him. And his thing up, you know what? Speak of the devil. Chris, is that you?
Yes, this is me, Chuck.
All right, Chris, you're on the air, just so you know. And I was just saying I wasn't sure where you were. I knew you'd be calling in shortly, and right on time you called. And the funny thing is, I know you weren't listening to the show and caught that because there's a little delay. So, you just happened to arrive right on time, brother. I was just starting to explain who you were, and but I'd rather if you did that. Like I said, though, at the beginning here, you came to my attention basically because I'm one of the guys who's an admin on the UCY.TV Facebook page, and you were sending messages about wanting to get involved with the network. Now, as I said, I'm not involved in those kind of decisions, but hey, if nothing else, you got on one time because you're on with me. So, I figured what the hell, and I'm always interested in the, younger generation because I'm concerned about what's coming up behind me here. I'm in my 40s. I'm like, probably your parents are younger than me, So I'm concerned about what's going to come up next because of, in alternative media in general, especially I'm concerned about it. But, I mean, globally, I'm concerned about the generation following and the one that's going to come of age very shortly, So I do have younger guys on my show than some people do. And the reason is it's good to see exactly where we're headed, okay? Because this is the kind of thing that nobody bothered to do when I was younger. Of course, I wasn't awake at your age. So first of all, let me salute you for thinking outside of the paradigm at your age. That's the first thing. But hey, before I get way the hell ahead of myself, let's talk about what it is you do. All right?
Okay. I've been an activist for a couple of years on Facebook. It's about 2016 I started doing sharing stuff from pages about what's our situation with government, a lot of the corruption that's just rampant in our government, showing this jump from the private sector back into the government. It happens a lot of times. Like one example is Monsanto's vice president later became the head of the FDA. Many examples like that. And really, it's one of the main points I like to prove doing the activism is that this is not a democracy. This is not a republic. This is not a capitalist country. This is not a socialist country. This is what it is a fascist country by definition. It is how Mussolini put it. The merger of corporate and state power is fascism. Actually, he said that fascism should be more properly called corporatism. That is the merger of corporate and state power. I found out about many of these things back when I was younger. I think I started the first major conspiracy, I guess, I looked into heavily was one of the major ones, and one of the ones that gets a lot of attention and has a lot of debate about is 9/11. And, with the Twin Towers, falling at free fall speed, despite the fact that the top floor was falling through building and not through thin air. And that raised a lot of questions. And, of course, explosions. And then eventually, I looked into it. I went on 911truth.org, and then I looked at all the coincidences, and I was like, oh, dang. Our government did lie about that, and apparently that was an inside job. And then you take that inch, you go a mile, and then you start finding out that this is not the first time they've done something like that. Today's 40 years since we left Saigon in Vietnam after the defeat of the United States forces, who were trying to push their way on Vietnam. And it was one of the wars that the United States imperialist efforts hadn't succeeded, and they got actually pushed out. But the start of that war was started on a lie. And the effect is just absolutely disgusting when you think about what happened as a result of the Vietnam War. All the people that were killed, the 600, there was 53,000 American soldiers killed, roughly. Maybe it's 55. I might have the number a little bit off. I think I got that mixed up with Korea, but
no problem. I'll tell you something, Chris. Let me interrupt you real quick. You know what's funny is you sound like you listen to my show. Because this is my point. I start more with the JFK assassination because that's what I did for years before 9/11 even happened. I was a researcher on that. And, of course, the connections to the fact that we wound up going full bore into Vietnam and the 58,000 Americans that were lost there, the over 1 million that were mutilated either physically or psychologically or spiritually, depending on how you look at it, that were returned back to our society here. The damage done that has resonated from that war, in my estimation, is one of the things that has set the course for this country. But, of course, that war was one of the early examples of this brushfire warfare concept, which has, proliferated throughout the Middle East now. We're involved in this, continuous adventure. We have now been in Afghanistan much longer than we were in Vietnam, and it is a long and punishing war. And once again, just like with the situation in the Middle East, it seems as though we were suckered into it by a lie. We were, brought about. I mean, you're talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident when it comes to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, the catalyst for all of the adventures in the Middle East now would be the post-9/11 reality that we're, existing in. And it's funny because I always love to bring up how Mussolini codified, fascism. And this is the particular situation we find ourselves in. That is the reality in our society. Now, there are people that will tell you that, it's different to discuss an economic system versus a cultural system, but that it actually resonates both ways when it comes to fascism, and we are watching the genesis of, we have watched, I should say, the genesis of this over the past few years in the post 9/11 reality, where the fascist state, which is concerned with the corporate interest primarily, and the marriage between the governmental powers and the corporatist powers are obvious, but at the same time, what does this do to our personal freedoms and liberties in any country, not just in America, but when one of these fascist regimes sort of takes its hold in any one of these places, the same thing happens. After a while, all dissent is sort of squashed and everything else, and this is what it is that I'm concerned about on a daily basis. And, again, Kennedy was going to pull us out of Vietnam. He took a bullet in the head. The much needed catalyst, the much needed new Pearl Harbor was given to us via 9/11, and of course, both of these things also parallel with with this phony drug war that we're allegedly involved in. I mean, I swear, man, you're actually speaking to exactly the same points that I repeat over and over again on my show. And you and I have never actually had a conversation. Literally, I discovered you by that message and said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you come on? I mean, that's all there was to it. I didn't, I'll be honest with you, I didn't listen to any of your shows because I wanted this to be completely fresh and we would just, get to know each other. And you could, make your voice heard to my audience your way. However that turned out, right? So we didn't have a lot of sort of pre-discussion about this, and it's funny because you sound like, if I had known, and you're only 17, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, good strong radio voice, by the way, brother. I like it. So just letting you know that too, better than mine. All right, but even so, I'm amazed, and again, I'm going to salute you for having come to these conclusions a lot sooner than me. I was sort of a political activist, but really much still hypnotized by the false left-right paradigm at your age. Thought it was good to do things. I was a musician too, so my activism came in the form of donating my efforts to things, and and giving up volunteerism, stuff like that at that time, to try and make certain points about inequities in society in one way or another, or individuals who were being mistreated or ignored by society. Stuff for the homeless, stuff for people that were, well, in my time when I was your age. Again, the AIDS epidemic was supposed to be the big thing. So this was something else that I participated in, because realistically, I actually care about humanity as a whole. So that's where my gut is, But there seems to be enemies to those of us that have that sort of feeling. I don't know if you feel that same way, if you feel as though, all human beings are a great collective, or if you're more of a nationalist, I don't know. But that's where I wanted to turn, is to see, if you're more thinking of humanity as a race, or if you're more interested in, restoring the sovereignty, to our alleged, representative republic, or what is it that your goals are, besides obviously to get the word out, to get people thinking, and to get their attention.
Well, I hope to wake up other people in my generation, because I see why you're worried. If being somebody outside my generation and probably looking at my generation doesn't look good, and from inside the generation doesn't look much better. Like, we have this, this general conformity nowadays that's is really alarming. And one of the main facts is that this generation is not rebellious as youth. They are generally fallen illusioned into the two-party paradigm. Nowadays, everybody's all supportive of the wars, it seems like, at least in my area. The ROTC programs, which I really, I don't feel any regret in paralleling them to the Nazi use, or Hitler's use in Nazi Germany, as it seems like to be the same thing. It's preparing young boys and girls and preparing them to become future, parts of the military for the many, adventures of the corporate military United States, because that's who these wars are profiting, is profiting people like Halliburton, who made $40 billion off this Iraq war. That's been an absolute travesty. 1 million plus Iraqis are dead because of this war. And even to our own soldiers, there's been a lot of people are, 5,000 have been killed, plus so many more injured, lives are ruined mentally, physically, but these kids don't have any grasp of what war really is. They think it's a Call of Duty game, and I'm trying to wake them up. I'm trying to wake them up to who's really the players. It's not the Democrats and the Republicans. They're one party playing as puppets for the financial super elite. These people that have billions of dollars, your George Soros, your Rockefellers, your Rothschilds, at probably the very top, the most richest family on the planet. And I see humanity as a whole. I see we're all brothers, and we get pitted against each other. I see the majority of us are good. However, there is that elite that is rotten to the core of greed, and the greed has taken over them. They're not even human in how they act. They've lost all essence of humanity. You already ignore it. The elite. When I talk about the elite, of course, the Rothschilds, your bankers, and that's the banking. The bankers, they control the United States via the Federal Reserve, and it's been that way for 102 years. That's when I say America was bought out. When the Federal Reserve happened, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Rothschild, all these elites met at Jekyll Island, which is ironically, I just passed by about a month ago on a road trip. I had a pretty bad vibe when I was riding past there on my way up to the Carolinas from Florida. And Jekyll Island is an island off the coast of off of Georgia, and that's where the elites met up to discuss making the Federal Reserve. And then later they had their crony Woodrow Wilson sign it into law, and when everybody was distracted, Congress was off in 1913, off on Christmas break on December 23rd, 1913, our country was sold off. So I want people to be aware that those are probably the people that truthfully have the most control of the United States. And the Federal Reserve is not a part of the United States government. It's a private bank that owns the United States government. And most of our congressmen have been bought out via many different lobbyists. I mean, lobbying is just a way of saying legal bribery. So I think that my radio program, Voice of Rebellion, is partially to get at that youth base, but also just to wake up people in general. And, I do maybe somewhat of a different tactic than some truthers in the movement. I've already been in the movement long enough to know that there's many different types of truthers, and I don't try to divide, I try to unify the truther movement. However, there's a lot that trying to divide in this movement, play the different, there'll be a lot of people that say my views are too left-wing, and, I'm ignoring the obvious fact they say that this country is actually communist when I say it's fascist by definition, but I still try to work with usually what's, I guess, would be called the anarcho-capitalist base that would be making these accusations toward me.
Right.
Or there's also the base that says that I'm, too lenient towards Muslims when I don't have a problem with any religion or any race, but there's people that think that Muslims are, trying to take over the United States, which I find kind of absurd because these people are not Muslim, for the most part. There are many different religions. That's kind of redundant. The fact that these people are billionaires and are parasites to our society, causing the masses, the 99.99% of us, to have to struggle for the little bit of money that's left. In fact, the top 400 people own 80% of our money. So that means that 400 people have 80% of our money. Then we're up to 318 million people approximately. So 317,999,600 people are struggling for 80 or for 20% of the money, while the other 400 have 80% of the money. The economic inequality is crazy in this country.
Right.
And that's proof that fascism is in this country. That's one of the main symptoms of fascism is extreme economic inequality with an elite controlling the country.
Right, which does leave the majority of the population there to struggle for the scraps that are left over, and that is the bottom line. Again, I gotta tip my hat because at a very young age you're extremely in tune to the reality of the world, man. Those that want to try and sort of pigeonhole you into the left or the right, it's because they just haven't been able to take a step back and understand that they are being given the controlled script. They're being given the definitions and therefore defining you by them, as opposed to really looking at the facts and understanding what the system is doing at this point. Wow, I got nothing to argue with you about, man. Nothing at all. You say exactly. I mean, you've never listened to my show, have you?
No, I've never listened to your show before. I mean, I kind of wanted this to be a surprise, see how this goes, a fresh start. I like to do that when I'm interviewing people, as on my own show. And I guess as an interviewee, it'd be decent to do that as well. So
that's exactly what I do. Yeah. So most of the time, I mean, I have some people on where I've read their books or I'm kind of familiar with them. I got repeat guests, different people, some people I know, but a lot of times I bring on people and it's like, no, I don't want to know anything. Let's just bring you on because I have a general idea that we can have this discussion, and let's see where it goes. But this is kind of funny. I don't think I've ever had another radio show host that pretty much falls right in line with what I think. So I find it kind of funny because you and I have never had contact with each other, but yet you're saying exactly the same kind of things. And sadly, it took me into my 30s to understand this. So glad to see that you're advanced. I'll tell you that. And, I've got, here we go, date myself a little more. Here we go with the old man speech, all right? I've got a daughter that's a year younger than you, okay? I've got a son who's, 10 months old now, but I've also got a daughter who's a year younger than you, and I can't reach her, Teenage girls are impossible to reach anyway. You got to wait. But, but the thing is, she's kind of bought off into this whole, sort of strange nexus of left-wing isms, where everything becomes permissible. There are no sort of standards that need to be applied to anything. The world is just fine because I can still get my, GMO snack chips and my soda if I want.
Oh, my God.
As long as the internet's working and she can chat back and forth with people and stare at her fondle slab of choice, everything is just fine. I can't, you can't even begin to have a discussion with somebody like that. And I see a lot of that in generally your generation. Again, you're an exception. I have another young man who comes on this show a lot. He's 16. His name is Dylan Wade, and he does a show called
I know
Truth
him.
Speaks. Oh, you know him? Okay.
Yes.
He's a good guy, but he's not as strong a speaker as you are, and has has a sort of a different personality entirely. But I'm telling you, after just listening to you speak on my show a little bit here today, I now have to listen to your show a bit because I want to hear what it's like when somebody actually is coming from the same sort of mindset that I do. So this is pretty interesting. Because I'm usually like the outcast, I don't want to sit here and scream about, one particular clan of individuals that may be involved in the larger cabal globally. You know what I mean? I choose to look at the entirety of the thing, and the continuous feeding of the military-industrial complex, via these brush fire wars, via this endless sort of engagements in foreign lands, which has done nothing but absolutely drain the alleged Federal Reserve, built, money supply that we should have in this country to be able to do things, and all of that being founded on a complete fabrication anyway. And of course, have you read G. Edward Griffin's book about Jekyll Island?
I've not actually read the book, but I'm interested.
You might want to take a look at that one, my friend, because it's quite the read. And G. Edward Griffin is an interesting guy. One of those guys that I point to when it comes to understanding the Federal Reserve and how it behaves and where it came from. Interesting guy, But I also seek to try and do the same thing when it comes down to bringing sort of truth movements together a little bit. I'd rather see us cooperate as opposed to arguing with each other. However, there are factions sometimes, it seems, that, just gravitate toward absurdity when it comes to, certain things. Look, if, all right, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Until I see evidence that, some weapon that was space-based was used on the towers, until I actually see the evidence, I'm not going for it. You know what I mean? Do I think that it happened the way they said it happened? No, the government's lying to you. I feel like that kid on the, I don't know if you ever watch, I love to watch cartoons, by the way. That's my way of sort of decompressing from this stuff all the time.
Yes.
So one of my favorite cartoons ever is the Boondocks, and I love that.
Oh my God, you like the Boondocks? I love that show. I've watched every episode.
Oh, but then you absolutely remember when Huey goes up to the microphone, taps on it, and says,
Oh, no. I know exactly what you're going to say.
Excuse me, Jesus was black, Satan is the devil, and the government is lying to you about 9/11. Thank you. Okay, and really, that's one way to boil it right down, isn't it? I'm not saying that I believe Ronald Reagan's the devil, but Jesus was most likely not, looking like Ted Nugent, baby. It just ain't happening. All right? And on top of that, the government is lying to you about 9/11. Now, if you want to try and sort out what that actually means and what the truth is, there's a whole lot of possibilities. Okay? And I don't marry myself to one particular theme except one, which is that we were lied to. We were lied to for the purposes of the world we now sit in, and this was the goal. The financial collapse that occurred in 2008, also right on time to make sure that, anti-war interests and things like that would not really take hold, because now people are more concerned with survival than they are with speaking out, about global issues and about our international affairs. Who the hell is paying attention to what's going on, really, in Afghanistan and Iraq? I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. Here's a news story that disappeared recently because we're so fixated on Baltimore and what's going on there. There's this whole engagement where Iran has apparently captured one of our ships. Blip, it disappeared, didn't it? and we're back to, well, look, all across the country, there's these riots. And meanwhile, remember, this is Black Lives Matter, this is Black Lives Matter, this is Black Lives Matter. And repetition, which, as we all know, if you ever studied any of the MK Ultra stuff, that's one of those things they do. It's called psychic driving, right? And that's how it works. That's how the mainstream works. Repetition, in your face, continuous, and to make sure you're distracted from what's really going on. This may be an important issue, that's true, but we're going to keep the somewhat important issue up front, which is being controlled and manipulated, so that you don't mind these other things that are going on. Don't look behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz, you know what I mean? This is the way it goes. And that's not to say that police brutality and what's going on and racism in and of itself are, non-existent, not true. But at the same time, I smell manipulation. I smell a controlled reaction. I smell somebody pulling this off on purpose. There's a reason why the mainstream is focusing on these particular incidents. There's a reason why they're playing the video of somebody's death. And let's just step back for a second and think about that. Repetition of playing a video where somebody loses their lives. That used to be illegal. Okay? That used to be, I'm not kidding you, Chris. If you look back, there used to be standards in broadcasting where you could not play the image, the moving image of somebody being killed on television. That's all gone. This is now being hammered into people to incite emotional reactions, the repetition of certain phrases and themes, and creating sides so that, listen, you can either support the police or you can support the protesters. The police are bullies, but they're supposed to be bullies. The protesters, well, they're acting out, and they're not supposed to do that, and you're all supposed to lay down. It's sickening is what it is. And I'm wondering, do you see the same kind of thing when it comes to this?
Well, I think that it's funny that this, whole fact that we were very close to a third world war, in the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's not even, I'm not exaggerating. Right around Yemen, it's something that almost parallels the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the United States puts up a blockade around Yemen, and, just to jog everybody, I guess, to present what I know about Yemen, plus, anybody in the audience that might not know what's really going on in Yemen, because it is a little bit of a complicated situation, as the Middle East always is. There's so many different factions, but it's funny, I know a lot about the Middle East. But in Yemen, there's the group, the Houthis, who were a revolutionary group against Hadi. Hadi was the leader of Yemen. He was a United States puppet that a lot of drone strikes in his country. He was de facto, and if you know anything about the real war on terror is that the United States has funded terror groups since the 1980s, ever since Mujahideen was funded by Ronald Reagan and in the United States government. Actually, it goes back to Carter. Really, Carter started it. Started funding Mujahideen, and then continued on Reagan in the Soviet-Afghani war. And that splintered off into all the terror groups we see today: Al Qaeda, Taliban, Khorasan, ISIS. And ISIS, Al Qaeda were practically allowed. This Al Qaeda friendly president Hadi that was in charge. So the people finally got pissed off, and they supported the Houthis. The Houthis, who were not directly funded as the media tried to present them, the little that they talked about, and they tried to make it seem like they were this directly Iranian-funded group. No, they were Iranian-supported, but not funded. And this Iranian-supported group took charge of Yemen in February, early February, and right after, within about a few weeks, Saudi Arabia starts doing airstrikes and starts starting a full-out ground invasion. Saudi Arabia, which is, if anyone knows anything about Saudi Arabia, is the epitome that the United States government does not stand for freedom and democracy, because Saudi Arabia is one of the most repressive regimes on the planet. I mean, they still have beheadings for petty crimes, practically. Right. Women can't even drive there, and it's one of the most repressive regimes on the planet. But let me not get ahead of myself. Saudi Arabia invades Yemen. Yemen then is now getting invaded by Saudi Arabia. Iran wants to send a couple missiles over, actually they were just sending aid over to Yemen, But the United States says, not so fast. We're putting a blockade up, and if you cross this blockade, we'll intercept your ship. So what does that sound like? Oh, Soviets, you better not bring those missiles to Cuba, because if you come over here, we'll intercept your we're going to intercept your ship and might start a nuclear war. And that's what Iran, even though they don't have any nukes, that would be a very ugly war. That'd be the entire Middle East would be in flames if they started a war with Iran. So we were so close to a war there. Eventually, the United States kind of pulled back on the blockade a little bit. It's still tense. The blockade is still partially up. Just one of the warships that was blockading Yemen left. And now Iran, and they said they probably won't intercept any Iranian ships. I think they said only if they have weapons on, no more to aid ships. But, Iran, I think, has the right to help out the Yemeni people who have been invaded by Saudi Arabia illegally, and they're, under all rules of humanity and international law, that was not justified, and already thousands have died in Yemen as a result. And then you have this Baltimore thing starts, which is tragic. It's very tragic what happened to this guy. I actually think this is a very good example of what our police brutality situation has become. This guy, Freddie Gray, gets tortured in the back of a van, beat, senseless, has a spinal injury, and has denied medical care for 2 hours until his death. So, of course, I could see protests. I could even see a little bit of getting violent. However, I really don't get the purpose of, burning down your neighborhood bakery or something like that. It had nothing to do with, that guy's death, or nothing, and never done anything bad to you.
Well, and that's part of the problem here is that, when we look at these things, look, it's not going to be productive. We know that. But the fact is, the last really violent resistance that occurred in the streets in the United States that was successful, in all honesty, was in 1776, man. That's the reality here. It's not going to happen this way. But like you said, on the other hand, yeah, this does directly address the police brutality situation. It seems like every week, I had Maria Heller on here on Tuesday, and she was telling me, she corrected me. Every day there's another one of these incidents, okay? And it's just a symptom of what's going on regarding the police state. And one other thing before you go on about that is that, to take a look back at our history with Iran, I mean, you're aware of, like, Operation Ajax and all that, right?
Operation Ajax, which it's ringing I can't think of the specifics right now.
Okay, Mohammad Mossadegh, who was the democratically elected leader of Iran, we overthrew him through terrorist means by the CIA, and then put our guy in place as usual, one of our puppet people, and that was the alleged Shah of Iran. Okay.
Now I think I know.
Yeah, that stuff happened, even before Carter. This stuff was happening in, the 1950s?
1953 was the Iranian coup, yeah.
There you go. So, and this all sparked, again, by our way out of control intelligence agencies who, have failures of intelligence when it comes to, 9/11, who have failures of intelligence, they say, when it comes to Iraq, even though I've had a gentleman on this show who is a whistleblower who tells us that actually there were weapons of mass destruction there. The fact is that they were actually sold to the Iraqis by U.S., based companies and individuals directly involved as the Carlyle Group, believe it or not, which, if you know anything about that, means that you're aware that George H.W. Bush was involved in that, and who was the president at the time of, our invasion of Iraq, which has still not ended, despite the fact that they say that we withdrew troops and we, drew down and all this other nonsense. We have been continuously involved there since 2003. So again, another decade-long engagement in a foreign nation where we don't belong on false pretenses. Either way you slice it, and also Afghanistan, we're still there. Let's remind everybody about that. And again, all of these things always go in line, just like from the Vietnam War, we were right there by the Golden Triangle, and we had, surprise, surprise, an illicit drug problem on the streets of America with heroin, didn't we? Then, when our military and intelligence assets were involved in South America, which is a much better climate to grow cocoa plants and to make sure that cocaine could be brought into this country, that happened, didn't it? And, then there was a little bit of a slowdown as far as the foreign involvement, and all of a sudden we had all these domestic designer drugs and, urban chemists being able to manufacture their own stuff for a little while until 9/11 comes along, and surprise, surprise, we are actually having troops defending opium crops. And at the very same time, what do we have? Well, gee, another epidemic of heroin on the streets of America, which has still not ceased to flow as we speak, Chris. So, isn't it funny how all this stuff goes hand in hand? But you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist like me, aren't you?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, we're all crazy conspiracy theorists. Yeah, we can make all the connections of the drug war, the phony, war on terror, which, this war on terror, literally it's caused ever since the Iraq and Afghanistan invasions over in that region where, opium has grows pretty easily. There's been something like 1,000 time in production increase, so they've, increased their opium, drastically ever since the invasion. And, United States soldiers are, you can find testimonials of soldiers that were actually in Afghanistan, and they can tell you that, we guarded poppy fields. They weren't burning them like they try to claim to. They were guarding them for transport to Europe, to the United States for heroin. The United States the United States government is the biggest drug cartel in the world. It's not one of, it's the biggest drug cartel in the world. They were in Vietnam, very sick act that was going on. They would put the opium that also grows in Vietnam into the caskets and quotation of American soldiers, and then that's how they would sneak it back home, back to the United States. And it completely went under the public eye. And yes, in the 70s we had a very bad heroin problem. And the United States government was trafficking cocaine. I mean, I think of one word that comes to mind, and I really love to talk about Latin American issues because I am Latin, and I know a lot about, the history of Latin America. I especially try to wake up, I guess there's no especially when it comes to race, but I do like to wake up my fellow Hispanic brothers, and tell them the history of the United States government and what, legacy that's left on our South America, have really pushed back any progress. And now finally we're getting progress, and then they declare any government that wants to bring real progress, cutting the ties between the bankers and the United States and, and cutting and getting rid of all that trash out of the South America. They call them threats to national security. They call them, terrorist aiders. They call them all kinds of names when all they're doing is severing the ties between the United States government and their countries that's caused so much harm in the past. But back in the day, in the 80s, they would, throughout all Central America, the United States government would be trafficking, cocaine with the aid of the Contra rebels, which the Contra rebels were not even, they were not this group for freedom. They were actually a fascistic group of armed mercenaries that were from the rich neighborhoods and, were against the poor majority of their country. Let me remind you, the Sandinistas were elected democratically in 1980. I think that was the year when the Sandinistas were democratically elected. So they didn't, they did strong arm their way to revolution, but they didn't strong arm their way to power. They let the people decide if they should be in power. However, they didn't just take power and never have an election about it, like many people in the United States think. And then they had these Contra rebels trying to overthrow a democratic elected regime, which is so common, by the United States government, aiding the, it's not also just the United States government. George Bush once named 3 countries as the axis of evil. I'm not going to put any of those 3 countries on this real axis of evil, not by the people or anything in those countries, but just by the governments of those countries. And, with either the three of the major collaborators with the bankers and the very top that are trying to seek control of this planet. But the real axis of evil, Saudi Arabian government, the Israeli government, and the United States government. They all work together to create havoc in the Middle East or even in South America. A country like Israel, which you think would have no connection to South America, they are known to have Mossad agents and spies trying to do acts of sabotage against the current Venezuelan government. So the United States government, they don't just kick out those ambassadors from the coming from the United States for no reason. because they're trying to commit sabotage and trying to overthrow their government and bring back the Condor fascist dictators that used to be in charge of South America. You know, your Manuel Noriegas, who went to the School of Americas and was a fascist dictator that was in charge of there for 7 years. The only reason he was overthrown by the United States is probably because I imagine that D.C. wasn't getting their cut of the Coke money anymore.
Yeah, Nicaragua was definitely an interesting sort of show about how this whole thing works. But of course, if you take a look at places like El Salvador or even Guatemala, you can find that U.S. intelligence assets were overthrowing all sorts of popular governments in those nations. In order to continue doing business as usual. And at that time, a lot of cocaine traffic, a lot of arms traffic, a lot of things like that. The support of continued death squads throughout a lot of these countries, throughout the entire region. This is something that is ignored a lot, to be honest with you. In alternative media, I don't hear so much about this, But
well, if you want to hear more about it, go to my station. My station talks about a lot of this stuff regarding Latin America, the Middle East. Sometimes I think that my station, not to be bragging or trying to put our station at a higher level than the truthers, but I feel like we focus more on the, maybe the more international perspective. We do talk about stuff that's going on in the United States. Like I was talking about Operation Jade Helm. I also connected that to what was going on in Yemen and the potential for a third world war. And that's why they're also doing these martial law exercises, because those are going to coincide. When third world war has started, there's going to be martial law to coincide. I'm sorry I cut you off there, Chuck, but
no,
I just
it's
wanted to
fine.
get that point out.
No, it's fine, and I'm glad you do. And by the way, tell everybody exactly how they can find you and all that too. I know the name of the network that you're on is Stay Bold Radio, right? And and the name of your show?
Yeah, Voice of Rebellion Radio, and we do on Stay Bold Radio. We do this at Sundays at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific time, and usually we do a 1 or 2 hour. Well, actually, we do more. Usually 2-hour shows is usually our general average time that we do. We've had a lot of guests on there. We have a lot of activists, and mainly, we do talk about either stuff like Operation Jade Helm, or we talk about Latin American issues, or what's going on in the Middle East, and try to clarify as best as we can, because that is a total. I want to say a word that I probably shouldn't use, because he told me to keep the swearing to a minimum, but I had a perfect word for it. But I'll just say it's a total mess that has so many factions, and our media keeps you so confused that that you can never figure it out. And it really takes a little while to get the grasp of what's going on, but eventually do get an idea of what's going on there, and you can actually reflect and look at you can actually piece together the realities of the situations there, because that's one place where almost all the reports that our government gives about the Middle East are not true. From the people that are supposedly the bad guys, or that the bad guys are working with us, with the United States government, not us the people, or, the bad guys like Bashar al-Assad, for example. It's not really one of the bad guys. He's not, that's the real bad guys that work with the bad guys that we, are supposedly fighting. It gets really confusing, but that's for another time.
No, but, you know what that comes down to, though, is that it's just fine no matter what your criminal activity is, no matter how oppressive you are to your people. It's just fine so long as you're serving the purposes of the greater corporation or the military-industrial complex, one or the other. It's just fine. Saddam Hussein was one of our guys so long as he was battling with Iran, just like you pointed out and I do this all the time, Mujahideen, thusly becoming Al-Qaeda, which I do refer to as the Al-Qaeda, okay, because we had control of those guys, like all the way up until those towers fell. Didn't we have control of those guys, allegedly, right? Even this, the guy, the alleged leader of ISIS, and this, of course, it
that's a big fraud right there.
Slots together, right? Like I said, I had an intelligence operative on this show who talked about actually having grabbed up, al-Baghdadi at one point, okay, and actually having him in custody. We had this guy in custody, and now that's a known fact, and even the mainstream has had to admit that he was part of the people that we imprisoned and tortured and stuff like that in Iraq, which is, yet another issue nobody wants to talk about. We're doing ourselves no favors in the Middle East, and every single one of these situations, when I investigate it, when I talk to somebody on the ground, you know what I always find? That there's intel people that are doing things they're not supposed to. There's always Mossad agents that are involved. There's always the intermingling between the military intelligence and the alleged CIA. There's always this stuff going on. There's always another agenda going on. It's where the war terror is such a ridiculous notion that it's beyond me. And I was shook and not even awake or aware at the time 9/11 happened. I completely bought into it. I make this admission all the time on the air. I was all for let's just nuke everything over there and be done with this because we were just attacked. That was the attitude I took. Okay? Now, have I learned in recent years? Have I learned, well, a few years later, only like say about 4 years later, I understood that I'd been had. Okay, it took me a little while, like I said, a little slower on the pickup than you. So, again, I got to tip my hat to you because you have come to all these understandings at a very early age. And I know I keep saying it, but sorry, man, I'm impressed. So, but I would like to talk more about what's gone on and what is going on still in Central and South America, because people think that, because we're talking about Iran-Contra and we're talking about the proliferation of the drug importation and all that, a lot of people think that that's all ancient history. But even to this day, there's interference with these governments. There is still the attempt to overthrow, manipulate elections.
Big time.
The terrorizing of local populations goes on with no coverage in the mainstream, with no coverage even in the alternative media at this point. There are still people on the ground there that I do get to hear from every once in a while that tell me stories that, listen, after a while, I could be talking to one crazy man in one place, but all of them cannot all be insane. They're all seeing the same thing, and it's still going on. It's not at the high level it was in the 80s. But that's only because we got a good supply and a good thing going on the other side of the globe. So, but they haven't let go. They haven't let go of their affiliations that caused death squads to rise up, that caused all sorts of dictatorships that were oppressive to the people, the region, the resources, that did damage that is still resonating from then to now. There's impoverished areas that were absolutely devastated by this stuff. There were whole groups of individuals, body counts that you can't even begin to imagine because they weren't reported or recorded. Okay? There is a lot of bodies that are attached to that whole adventure that I think we'll never hear about. What do you think, Chris?
There are a lot that'll never be heard about. There's a lot that'll never be found. I mean, you talk about the Condor years. The Condor years is one of the ugliest, times of history, one of the ugliest events that ever have happened in recent history. People don't fathom, how bad that was for South America. Well, let me put an example. Who was in charge? Some of the main collaborators of the United States, fascist government during the time. These fascist dictators that were brought up. Let me put up the first one. 9/11 means something different in South America. Because on 9/11, 1973, Salvador Allende, democratically elected Chilean president, wasn't killed, but he was forced to take his own life as enemy forces were nearing him. These enemy forces were military traitors that were paid off by the United States government to do a coup, and they brought in military dictator Augustus Pinochet, who reigned in power for the next 18 years, would have a disappeared list. These people would disappear
in the case of
black vans.
I'm sorry, in the case of Allende, what you have, though, is an entirely orchestrated situation where, again, U.S. military and mostly intelligence assets, but U.S. military assets as well, basically choreographed the entire situation to give this guy no way out. And then you're right, exactly. Pinochet comes in, and go ahead. I just wanted to make that point real quick.
People get disappeared into the countryside in black vans, for the next 18 years until he left power in 91. And the thing is that he didn't spend the last years in prison like he should have, despite the people that he had killed. I think he killed tens of thousands of people, maybe 100,000. In a generally small country, Chile. instead of, spending the last days in prison, he spends it in, Thatcher's controlled Britain, who Thatcher was one of the main menaces. Thatcher and Reagan were the evil couple that caused a lot of damage to South America, a lot of harm caused by those two. And that's just one of the dictators. There's also, a horrible one was Paraguay's Alfredo Stroessner, who was he reigned in power for 35 years, from 1954 to 1989. He was in power, and he killed tens of thousands as well in the little tiny country of Paraguay. And he had the United States support, the United States blessings the whole way. And what's funny is that the United States government supported the same party that Stroessner belonged to, has came back to power after they had, ended. They were trying to end that legacy in Paraguay. They had their own president that was not belonging to, the Stroessner party, the Colorado party. They had this guy named Fernando Lugo who was in power. Then he got sick with cancer, and then Parliament turned on him, and the Parliament brought in this new guy, Horacio Cortez, who is now in charge of Paraguay, and he belongs to the same party as the Colorado party. So it seems a little bit disturbing that maybe the same situation might be happening again in Paraguay. Argentina had a fascist government. Most of the entire South America, it was called the Condor Years, all across South America and Central America. There was in '64 a military coup happened between, the United States military supported, and then after that they were all disarmed, and then there were hundreds of thousands were killed. These were mostly natives killed in Guatemala after they had a coup bringing in a military dictatorship. They had, and then recently, recently there's been some coups. Honduras, for example, in 2009, they had a left-wing, president was about to take power, Zelaya. However, Zelaya was, by a police-aided police coup. The national police of the country turned on Zelaya and at gunpoint threw him out of power, bringing in pretty much another military dictatorship that now is currently in charge of Honduras. Also back in the day we had, Venezuela. The real dictatorships, the real corrupt government was back then. Right now, this is the government of the people that's in charge, and that's why you see so many attempts against it. It's ridiculous. The United States government is fixated, absolutely obsessed with taking out Hugo Chavez's current government. Now it's been Nicolas. Unfortunately, it's been about over 2 years since Hugo Chavez passed away from a fight from cancer. I don't know if it's the unlucky bunch that South America had, where all these leaders that were trying to make a change for South America, they finally had these people that were not from the Condor years, that came in power all since '98, which I guess it's kind of cool that I was born in '98, and I was born in the year that finally the change started. It was like a fact. When Hugo Chavez was elected to power in Venezuela, defying all odds, nobody thought that he would make it out of prison. He was imprisoned in the '90s by the U.S.-aided government of Carlos Perez. And yes, I know I'm saying U.S.-aided, but it really is just ridiculous. The government aided all these, either dictatorships where there was absolutely no elections and it was just a military dictatorship, or these countries where they had, two parties that were exactly the same, and they, caused all these, they would still kill a bunch of people and cause a bunch of problems for any activists, like the ones in Venezuela. They had technically an electoral system still, but it was like the United States. It was like the Democrats and Republicans have said their names of the party were different. Copay and Acción Democrática, but those two parties, went on and again, and then in '89, they slaughtered a bunch of activists, and that started the kind of the movement in the '90s to finally change that government into the one, that we have today. A bunch of people started getting behind this, really a guy that came out of the countryside. He, from within the military, made this group called the MBR 200, and this group was it was a Bolivian group, is what they called it. In the ideas of Simon Bolivar, and and he had this guy with some left wing ideals, and finally the end of corporatism in South America guide and the end of the United States and interference in Venezuela, starting in the 80s. And Chavez in 92 attempted a coup and, against the Carlos Perez government. And then in 1990, or shortly after, from 92, he spent time in prison. However, they found out that the guy that imprisoned him was going to be imprisoned because the people finally got pissed off and they charged him with fraud and a few other charges. And then the other guy, the guy that threw Chavez in jail, just bear with me here, got thrown in prison. He gets released from prison. He decides to run. And then in 1998, the U.S. media was doing whatever it could to make sure, Fox News, all of them were doing whatever they could, to try to make it seem like he would not win. They were saying that he was going to get 8% of the vote. He won the election. And then he won the election, and he's had Socratic elections, despite whatever CNN, MSNBC, your big three, your corporate news have to say. It's really, by real unbiased international observers, they, have said that this is a very fair system. It's very, hard for it to be rigged. And,
right. And
he's now been...
And Chavez, the Chavez, the party that Chavez belongs to is not necessarily perfect by any means, but the fact is that the attempts to demonize him, among Western media were obvious all over the place. They even went as far as to say that the whole reason why we experienced such a spike in fuel prices was due to, Venezuela's participation, because they were a major supplier to, like say ExxonMobil and things like that. That they were really responsible, for that huge, jump in prices that we've experienced over the past few years, especially post 9/11, right? Things that they did to try and, make sure that there was no sort of sympathy for this guy. And, but it's not limited to even the countries you've mentioned. I mean, even in places like El Salvador, we were not only funding and fronting for an oppressive government, but at the same time, there were a whole bunch of splinter factions of death squads that were in support of the main alleged government in El Salvador that we were also funding, mainly through that nexus that had to do with the drug money and all that stuff, but even still, regardless of how the funding came about, this is something that was being supported by the United States directly and its U.S. covert assets. And this has been, continuously done. It has sort of calmed down, as I said, over the past decade or so, but it's not, it's not stopped. This is still happening, and I am a little bit nervous because I think that, hey, if by some miracle, the Middle East does not wind up in flames, and somehow or other we're actually pushed out by, the rest of the world from the Middle East, I think that the intelligence assets and the military assets will turn their attentions back to South America, because it's still a perfectly, profitable basket of wonderful resources down there that can be exploited, which of course is always the low-hanging fruit to these corporate guys. That's the bottom line. I mean, why were we so interested in a place like Cuba? Why were we so interested in El Salvador? Why were we so interested in Panama? Why were we so, it's all because of the potential for exploitation by the greater corporate interests. And this is the continuation that we still see today. So I'm wondering about this, though. How did you come to know all this? Because I know very well this is not what you're being taught in school.
Of course not. No. In school, I actually end up in a lot of debates, and it's kind of funny. It's like, what I feel like? It's like you're talking about the Boondocks earlier. Every now and then, it's like, when I watch the Boondocks sometimes, I'm like, no, it's like a black version of myself, with a cool afro and a little bit younger. That's what Huey Freeman kind of reminds me of. And, in school, it's like I end up in these debates, where people are just saying absolutely ignorant stuff about these topics, the Federal Reserve and stuff like that, or 9/11. Okay, we got a 9/11 debate last week, actually.
Oh, my. And I guarantee that they were just parroting, either Fox News or something like that. And, the Muslims are the most dangerous thing in the world, and they're trying to take over, and Sharia law is going to come to Connecticut, and, all that, right? I mean, I'm willing to bet that's the kind of thing that you were faced with, and then you had to tell them what?
Well, at first, yeah, it was kind of like that, especially with the teacher. The teacher was actually the most, willing to, the most willing to, just keep spouting off this dumb propaganda, and he kept trying to deny science. I don't know how he just, this guy, I wish he knew a little bit more about, he was trying to, refute what I was trying to say. I first went right at the science claims. I was like, okay, number one, it's true that jet fuel can't melt steel beams because jet fuel does not burn at 1,800 degrees. One simple fact is that if it was really 1,800 degrees, that fire that we saw in those famous pictures over and over and over and over again would have been a white fire. Did we see a white fire? No, it was like an orangish fire, and that would indicate a fire that's probably well cooler than 1,800 degrees. 1,800 degrees is a very hot fire, and that did not happen. Number two, the physics point, of course, where that building, the top floors fell at the same speed as if it was falling through thin air, but yet it was falling through building, which only implies there's only only one thing where that happens is where there's an implosion and the buildings under it actually are not there because they're being imploded, and then it is kind of falling through thin air, and that's how it falls at that speed when there's an implosion.
Right.
And that's what it looked like and was, an implosion. I think we can conclude that.
Well, speed-wise, here's the thing. If you go that far, they can come up with a claim that refutes that. And here's the deal. Realistically, the most conservative estimate I've ever seen is that it fell at about 66%, and any of them fell at about 66% of free fall speed in reality. Now, the reason is that because of the resulting aggregate mass above, you have an increase in speed because as the mass increases, But the thing is, even so, 66% doesn't jive with the idea that there's supposed to be resistance. Okay, the rest of what was below there should have shown some signs of resisting. There should have been some sort of resistance being demonstrated, and there was none. And that's building 1, 2, and 7.
That's all of them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the ball game right there. Is that what? Even if you don't believe that it went at free fall speed, which you can argue scientifically, you can argue it's not at free fall speed, but even if you give them that point, here's the next problem. It still is not represented there that there was any significant resistance that should have been. That's where your problem is, right? And what did they say to this?
I would say my teacher got really offended, of course, and he just starts saying, it's like, oh no, it's just that this is it's a fact that the terrorists did it or whatever, But the thing is, like, the students were already kind of a little pissed at him from other stuff that happened that day, so they were a little bit willing, and I kind of played that into my cards. Like, this one girl was like, was just like, yeah, what he said, because they were already pissed at him, so they're just willing to take my side. I'm like, okay, I guess this is how it's going to be. And I'm just over there bringing up more claims about, what really happened on 9/11. And I talked about the controlled, demolition. Eventually, the one point where I don't know what exactly his reaction, but I think he's just a little bit befuddled, is where I bring in the possibility of an Israeli involvement on the Twin Towers collapse and all the events that happened on 9/11. I mentioned, if the infamous mural van, the dancing Israelis, I don't know if I brought up the George Washington Bridge where the van full of explosives, there was an Israeli in the van, and then there was actually 60 Israelis, something like that, arrested on September 11th, and almost all of them were exonerated and sent back to, Israel. So it's these Mossad agents, is what I'm assuming, were probably there to facilitate. I'm not going to tell what theory I belong to on this. That I belong to the mutual three-country theory, which I would say is Saudi Arabia provided the actors, provided, the passports, the famous, oh my God, we found the passport, supposedly it survived the ball of fire, fell down onto the street, and they just found the passport. I can't even find my cell phone in my own pocket. I really doubt you can find a passport on the sidewalk.
Well, after all, Chris, what do you expect from a police force that's being run by Bernie Kerik, who was later on, brought in to help train the Iraqi police after the invasion and during the occupation time in Iraq? I mean, hey, this is a guy who didn't benefit from it or anything. You don't think that there's any way, shape, or form that the New York City police could have been somewhat involved in creating something like that?
Well, of course they had to have been involved. They were involved just as much as they were involved probably with the national forces. The United States military, U.S. Air Force. I think all the government branches knew what was going on because they had NORAD was told to stand down by Cheney, and of course the United States Air Force were having drills off the coast. They made sure there would be away from the actual events, and they're just that's their excuse. We were doing drills.
Not to mention a fully documentable change in the rules of engagement regarding civilian aircraft just previous to 9/11, which was changed immediately after 9/11 back to its original form. Let's not forget that, because that kind of screwed things up a little bit too, because now they actually needed the direct consensus of a guy like Rumsfeld, who was in power at that time as Secretary of Defense, right, in order to act upon these things. And meanwhile, hey, let's fit a plane into a hole at the Pentagon. Of course, I'm sure you made some of my listeners happy because they harangue me all the time about how I don't bring up the dancing Israelis when a 9/11 discussion goes on. You did it all by yourself, though. So you know what I'm talking about there, right?
Well, yeah. It's of course. I mean, when you talk about the Israelis, it's like I feel like that is important because it does show that there was not just our government involved, but there's also what I call the real axis of evil is involved. The Israeli government with Mossad agents were provided to facilitate, the act. They were making sure that it would actually happen, probably, because, Benjamin Netanyahu did say not long after the Twin Towers fell that this is one of the most beneficial things that has happened to Israel, partially because ever since the Twin Towers have fallen, all you see on the streets is, a lot of times is all these bumper stickers. I support Israel. I heart Israel. It's like I stand with Israel. Ads on the radio about Israel. It's so politically correct to support Israel. And then when I say the Israeli government murders thousands of Palestinians, a year, and they murdered 2,000 Palestinians in just a month alone during the Gaza siege that they did. They injured about 8,000 Palestinians and probably made homeless 10 times more than that. And they keep the Palestinians prisoners in their own land. This used to be their country. Israel, one of the biggest myths they ever try to make is that Palestine never existed. Palestine was the country that was there before. And then Israel got a piece of the land in 1947 by the United Nations. And then in 1967, they took more land after the Palestinians tried to stand up for themselves, because of the conditions that they already started. Israel had been brutal from the day one that they got there.
Right.
But it's continued to this day. And, now in 2015, it just specks of Palestine. They take every last bit of their land and put settlements here, put a settlement there, put a settlement there. It's really crazy that people are so blind to this. And they also, another thing is that they have segregation. They don't even get to sit at the back of the bus. It's worse than Jim Crow. They're not allowed on the bus, period. They have to walk for transportation, or they're not even allowed on Israeli buses anymore. That's actually a recent thing.
Right, even entering buildings and things. I had Ariana Love on here who was talking about her time in Palestine and discussing with me how you could only access certain buildings if you were a Palestinian through certain entrances and things like that. If you were Israeli, it was no problem. You go in any which way you want, but you had to present papers to go in between different sections of different places, and even to go to places of worship and stuff like that. The same thing applied. And this is one of the realities. Of course, Israel is a criminal state, bottom line, and honestly, so is our own alleged state at this point, because they have absolutely colluded with them to create a whole bunch of havoc throughout the globe. And the Saudis are just the convenient partners. So you're dead on with all this stuff. I'm wondering again. how it is. How did you come to this though? Because like I said, I know they're not teaching this to you. I mean, where did you, what caused you to start to think for yourself? Because again, harkening back to your generation, a lot of people in your age group just aren't doing it. They're staring down at their phones, they're staring down at their tablets. They're not thinking for themselves. They're just involved in, in all sorts of surrogate life. Their reality is really based on whatever somebody puts on a screen, what the new application is, what the new Xbox or, PlayStation 1 or whatever the hell, I don't know what they are anymore. PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, I guess. But either way.
That's it, actually.
But
yeah, it.
Their whole lives are based on that, and obviously yours isn't, because you've actually done some research, you've done some digging for yourself, you've taken the time to critically examine this stuff. I mean, let's give me the formula, man, because I want to hand it out. How do we get this to happen among people your age?
I don't know. It's I guess it's. I started looking up, after I found out about 9/11. I started just getting interested in many of these things, like, you start. I guess one of the main things is the corporate corruption. The United States, colludes with all these mega corporations against the rest of the people here, the major, 99.99% of us, and then there's 50% of this country. You start to find out these stats. Like 50% of this country is actually in what would be considered poverty. Because, the poverty numbers stay much lower. However, this is going by if you can pay your bills or not. And, and 50% can't pay their bills. 80% would be homeless if they lost their next job. And then you just start finding all these stats. I guess I took an inch. Maybe I went more than a mile. I took an inch and ran a marathon with it, I guess. But, I guess I could thank my dad for that, and I had, who also was pretty awakened, and he gave me some of the basics, and then I, started, running with that. I don't know how exactly you get your own kids, to start, sinking into this, but I don't know I guess I have this, kind of revolutionary spirit in my blood. I also have my uncle. One of my uncles is in my family in Colombia, is a politician against the Colombian government. He kind of stands with a lot of things I say too, and so I guess maybe it's just in my blood. But I learned more and more over the years, and then as by 2013, when I came, I don't know, maybe it was a kind of a spiritual journey when I went to Colombia and came back. I came back from Colombia, and I don't know, maybe just all the fear was away. That all the fear of what would happen. I just stopped caring of what people thought of me in this country. What a bunch of teenagers thought of me. I just started posting the truth and trying to wake people up, on Facebook. I met a Palestinian here in the United States that had introduced me to somebody that knew the people at NWO Truth Radio, and I started getting connected with them, and that's when I really started the activism, and that's where my radio career actually began, was at NWO Truth Radio. I'm not there anymore, but that's where I started doing my first shows, and then I just learned more and more just being around other truthers. I learned more stuff. I learned it pretty early. I guess when I was around 14 or so, I learned about the Rothschild family, these bankers, these top families. I learned about I really started to grasp the concept that a cabal. I finally found out what the New World Order really was. And before that, I had different. I just thought it was corrupt. This country's fascist. I think I came to that conclusion before I came to the conclusion that the New World Order existed, and that there's this group of elite that are trying to make a fascist New World Order. It's not just that they don't want to stop at the United States government and these other governments that are currently that way. They want the entire world mapped out, for governments that will serve only the very top 0.001% of the population, if that. It's really a very tiny minority of this world is trying to rule it all.
Right.
And you learn out more facts. You learn out, you learn out who went against and why real stuff really happened. Colonel Muammar Gaddafi was not killed because he was a supposed tyrant. He was not killed because he was all the other stuff that they accused him of. No, when you realize what he was doing, he was trying to do something that he was trying to free an enslaved continent that had been enslaved for a long time by Europe, by people. These monsters went through there and massacred. You don't hear these names, or you know what? Like an example, the Rhodes Scholarship was named after Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a monster. He killed 10 million Africans. That's as many as Hitler killed, in the Holocaust. And yet we have a scholarship named after him. These monsters that murdered, tens of millions in Africa are honored. And Gaddafi was trying to end that whole history by freeing them of the banking enslavement of their countries. There used to be colonialism. Now there's neocolonialism. He was trying to, rid Africa of neocolonialism, and then finally unite it all under a currency that he was making called the dinar, or the gold dinar. The dinar was going to be backed by gold, and all of Africa was going to be united under, the African Union led by him. And it was going to be with the gold dinar, and it was going to be against, there was pretty much going to be a whole coalition of Africa against the EU, against, countries like Turkey, and they're pretty close to them, that are pretty much just patsies for the New World Order, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Israel. He's going to stand against all that and be a very powerful, maybe the most powerful country, maybe alongside of, I would say nowadays, I think that more and more evidence. In fact, I think you can almost confirm that Russia, what this is all about is, again, that they've moved away from the Rothschild system, and that really, in a way, we're actually at a point of revolution in this world. We're actually, the tide is turning in the favor of the people. However, it will take the waking up of most, a lot of people are going to need to wake up and realize that the revolution is coming in order to seize the opportunity. We have an opportunity now, but if we wait too late, we're doomed by years of war and more years of financial enslavement.
Right.
And then we can finally end this ancient cabal. I mean, this cabal goes back, just the Rothschilds having the name Rothschilds goes back to the 1500s.
Right.
Rothschilds, before that, were named the Boers because they were a German family that changed their name to a pseudonym pretty much. The Rothschilds, not a real name. Rothschilds Red Shield bankers for their bank that they made. Before that were the Boers, and then probably their bloodline could be traced back to ancient times. It's known that these cabals have ancient bloodlines that they try to keep in line, and it's almost like these royalties, these royal families of the elite that they've been trying to keep for a long time, and they do it through various ways. They keep these families together.
Right, just like the House of Windsor is a German transplant also. And of course you're dead on here when it comes to Gaddafi. It was fine if he was a strong man. It was fine if he was, actually involved in this and that and the third thing. Again, not a perfect guy, but the reason why he got killed, and especially in the way he got killed, was because he was trying to decouple himself and extend that very same privilege to the rest of Africa. Decoupling himself from the international banking system. It would have been an independent system of finance, which would have been gold-backed, which would have been wholly unique to that continent. And, again, he was ingratiating himself to these other leaders. Of course, they ascribe all sorts of nefarious purposes to that and trying to form military alliances so that he could strike out at the West, allegedly, and all that. But the truth was that he was actually a little bit better for the continent of Africa than certainly what we have today. And certainly what was previously, and the fact is that they want to ascribe to him all of these sort of characteristics of being a madman and somebody who was absolutely steeped in terrorism of all sorts and a hatred of the West for our freedoms and things like that. But if you actually listen to what the man was saying and you followed what he was actually doing, the reason why this guy had to go was because he was absolutely struggling against the bankers. And the Russians may or may not be part of the actual solution when it comes to, going up against that international banking cabal. They may or may not. I'm not convinced that that's not just another puppet situation. Although you got to admire a guy like Putin a little bit, because he doesn't necessarily take all the same crap that a lot of these other people have taken from, that axis of evil you're talking about over the years that so many others have. So, again, I'm agreeing with you, and all this stuff. And by the way, I know those guys over at NWO also, like Dennis Ford and Pending and those guys. They're all friendly with me as well. I didn't know you were over there at one time. I don't recall that, but
It was kind of short. It was kind of a short time, but I was there for, like, I came on the network November 2013, and then around February, I think, was the last show I aired. So I was only there for about 2 months, 3 months or so. But then I moved over to what's my current network, Stables Radio, and I've been airing since then. So now it's been almost a year and 3 months I've been on Stables Radio, and I've done quite a bit on Stables Radio. I've interviewed people that were activists, like that have very famous activists, like Ray Lewis. And everybody. It's kind of funny. I was telling people at my school, I was like, "Hey, guess what? I'm interviewing Ray Lewis on my radio program." I'm like, "Really? The football player? How?" I'm like, "Oh, no, the activist, the former cop that turned into an occupier. That guy, yeah." And there was this Cecily McMillan who was in Occupy Wall Street, and her famous story is that she got pretty much assaulted by a cop, and then she had a knee-jerk reaction, and then they charged her with assault and slammed her with charges and put her in in the women's version of Rikers in New York, which the way she describes it is hell. For quite a while, and we were actually one of the first people to interview her after she got released from prison. And last year in August, we interviewed her with me and my co-host Al Suarez, which if you listen to our programs, you'll hear him as well. But yeah, at Stabled Radio, I've interviewed some people, like I was talking about that approach of not really finding out what they really stand for, or you find out what they stand for to an extent, but not everything about them before the show. And then one time I interviewed Fritz Springmeier.
Oh,
so
okay.
I do admire him for his book. However,
yes,
Fritz Springmeier did go a little bit, there was some stuff I really didn't agree with him on. But it was a generally good interview. However, we went from talking about stuff like we're talking about today. Next thing you know, we're talking about UFOs coming over to take over the world, and I was like, "Whoa, man!" Okay, so there's stuff like that happens, on my network, and just another interview that I've done. I've done a few others. I'll just let people go to the page and actually listen to some of the shows that I've done, some of the interviews that we've done in the past, and
I've had a couple of them go off the rails like that too before. I had a guy on to discuss the the underground facilities that are in the United States and stuff like that. A fairly reasonable topic, although it's way outside of the mainstream. Something that most of us understand is going on in one form or another, right? Next thing I know is I'm being talked to about what do you call that? Astral projection, what do they call that?
Astral projection. That's what they call it, right?
Well, that's one. The other one is remote viewing. Sorry, remote viewing. That's the right term for it. Remote viewing, and on top of it, alien technologies and things like this. And I went, whoa, I didn't expect that. I wanted to talk about these underground facilities, and you've actually seen them. You know what they have in them. Let's talk about that. And meanwhile, the guy who claimed to have been involved directly in technologies and things like that. I brought another guy on once to talk about the Freemasons and the Scottish Rite and things like that, and wasn't too thrilled with the way that turned out. Because sometimes these guys get into really weird kind of areas, and that's sort of the risk you take when you're working without a net, and it doesn't go as smooth as what we're doing right now. But that's the risk you take, and look, you know what? Let them speak their minds, and if at the end of it all you can take away the good stuff they said and think that okay, at least I got something good out of it, great. If not, if you want to just totally throw the whole thing away because now I've let this guy show himself to be out of his mind, you know what? That's fine too. You know what I'm saying? So either way, I figure it's still a good thing to do every now and then, is just kind of go in cold and see how it rolls, But let's see, what else did I want to ask you about? Yeah, stay bold. I'll tell you what's funny about that is, and I mentioned this to you in a text back and forth, but I'll mention it here anyway. See, stay bold is funny to me because it sounds to me like what Jack Blood says all the time. Because you ever heard of Jack Blood, by the way?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't really seen too much about it.
Okay, well, Jack Blood is a long-time alternative radio broadcaster. Been doing it for like a decade out there on various networks, everything from RBN. He used to be simulcast here on this network. He's been out there quite a bit. Also, sometimes stands in for the Power Hour. He's got his own thing going, Radio Free Blood. A guy I'm friendly with, anyways. But his tagline for years has been, the whole sort of paraphrasing of the "Stay bold and mighty forces will come to your aid." So quite often, when he's called into my show and stuff like that, which is always a surprise, but when he does that, he says "Stay bold" when he's hanging up. So that's sort of like one of his taglines. He does. If you want to go check out the kind of stuff he does and the kind of journalism he does outside of the radio show, you can go to deadlinelive.info. A good guy to check out, and somebody who is definitely not part of the mainstream problem, but definitely part of the alternative solution, is Jack Blood. Anyway, I take crap for that too sometimes. I don't care. He's still my friend. Anyway. But I'm wondering if the guy who came up with the name for your radio network there might be influenced by Jack. I don't know if you got a chance to ask, but you should ask him about that because that might be a funny story. You never know. So what caused you to want to get to doing radio shows, though? I mean, you started out with the NWO guys and then quickly kind of moved on to doing your own thing. Probably got more comfortable with the Stay Bold deal, for one reason or another. But what is it that, compelled you to do that? Because you could be a blogger, you could be a YouTube guy, you could be, because I used to do YouTube stuff on the JFK assassination because that was my main focus at the time. It led me into all this stuff, to be honest with you, eventually. But I did the YouTube thing for a while and just felt compelled to do the show that I'm doing now. But how did you get to that? Exactly. Because, again, at a young age, at the age of 17, sorry again, but I would expect you to be playing, Black Ops and maybe, carrying around your phone when you're bored, screwing around with, God knows, I don't know, Candy Crush, whatever deal, for somebody your age. You got to put energy, you got to put time, you got to put effort into this. What in the hell made you do that as opposed to just being like, the rest of the herd? Besides, okay, you're a critical thinker, but why go to the radio?
I guess it's, it's like I don't really mind doing the time on the radio, but how did I get eventually, I'm thinking back to how did I eventually get to radio is that, I joined, the person I met online, I met the Palestinian guy I already had known for a while, and then the Palestinian guy, because when I'm down in Colombia, I don't know what caused, I don't know, sometimes things just happen, so something switches in your mind, like that fear switch or whatever, criticism I might receive for saying the truth. I started, and then when I was down in Colombia, I was just like, you know what, screw it. It's like, why do I care? It's like, why do I care what those people say that in a place that's, sort of my home, United States is my home to an extent, but I also have my other home, Colombia. And it's like, I don't know, maybe knowing that I had that other home made switch in my mind off. I started posting stuff, and then the guy was like, then he tagged that guy in one of my posts. It happened that this guy, Timothy Wendell was the guy's name, who was also very young like me. He's actually from the same area, probably actually I think he's actually younger than me, actually, by a little bit. And that's the thing that shocked me. I was like, wow, somebody actually knows his stuff like me. And then I was like, I started doing the activism. It started putting the stuff on my Facebook page. I converted my Facebook page from, I guess it just really something I'd used before just to, try to talk to chicks most of the time, which I still do, but I do that aside of the radio and activism stuff. And oftentimes I catch myself trying to talk politics to chicks, which is a immediate turn off with most chicks my age.
Look, I'm sorry to laugh, but no, listen, there is absolutely nothing wrong with skirt chasing, my brother. That is something that you need to retain. Don't get so wrapped up in this that you don't do that. But at the same time, yeah, I've made that mistake before too, where it's been like, well, you get way off into that too much, and they just kind of shut down on you. So it's not even your age group. It's just that's
It's
not usually the pickup for women. That's all there is to it. But don't get discouraged. Eventually you'll either find one that you wind up converting or already agrees with you, and it'll work out good. Don't worry. but but it is funny that you say that because it changes like your whole social interaction, doesn't it? And
yes, it does.
it seems like to me that what happened to you, and this is how I would explain it if I was you, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, the things coming together where, look, you realize there's a whole lot more to be lost by, understanding that you feel kind of at home in two different places that are quite different. I mean, Colombia is very different from the United States. And so between that not being necessarily nailed down to wherever it is you are in the United States, and also having that sort of kinsmanship with the individuals that are going through a completely different culture in Colombia, you could also see what the history was like, then have some sympathy or empathy, more accurately, for your Palestinian friend who has probably endured a lot of horrible things, and then you sort of see that, it's the corrupt nature of things that created that, and then maybe this caused you to have to speak out, so what you had, which at the time you had a Facebook thing, which was, generally just there for screwing around and, and generally being stupid, which is what, 98% of people on Facebook do. And that's not a reflection on you, but I mean, hell, that's what I did with it at first too, and then I got bored with it. But then after a while, you said to yourself, well, listen, why don't I just use the mechanisms I have to speak this truth that needs to be spoken? And you just kind of got driven to do that. And then next thing is, these guys tag you and hook up with you through that. And that's how you got to radio, because that's what they were doing. If these guys were doing TV shows or making DVDs, that might be what you were doing right now, too, because that just by happenstance, that's what you got to. And because you're so young, hey, the possibilities are endless, man. You could go on to do all sorts of different things, or wind up doing, radio for, you could be the 20-year veteran that we haven't had to see yet, because, internet radio as it stands hasn't existed long enough. The longest standing person I can think of is Maria Heller, that I have on my show sometimes, and she's been around since now she's in her 15th year and about to go into her 16th year of doing this, right? That's why, I mean, I absolutely love her. She's a little bit different from me, but at the same time, like, in the same kind of world, and she definitely tries to speak to the truths of things, the evolutions of things, the real history, not the BS that, is being rammed down kids' throats in schools today, but the reality of the history, and the history as it's unfolding in front of us. Because one day, hopefully, if we don't all get destroyed, if there isn't 5 more Fukushimas in the next couple of years or something, we might have the chance to be talking about this 20 years from now. I mean, I probably won't be here, but somebody might talk about this and talk about the time when, there was all these different people on the internet doing this, and hopefully they'll be talking about it as the good thing that actually was the catalyst for changing the entire, group consciousness of the planet. Oh, there I am being an optimist. I'm sorry, guys. I shouldn't be an optimist, but I have to be every once in a while. I'm hoping that eventually, that eventually all these drops in the ocean of madness and sadness on this planet might actually turn into a tide that shifts, everything, and changes that landscape that the tide gets to crash upon the shores of. Okay, excuse me for hoping. Sorry, that was me just talking to them, Chris. But but the thing is, I get, you wouldn't believe it, man. A lot of people that listen to me just hate me because because I won't let go of what I know is correct. You know what I mean? I don't want to buy into every single outlandish theory, but at the same time, I'm not buying the official nonsense either. You know what I mean? It's a balancing act. And man, I again tip my hat to you because you're doing this at a very young age. This is why I love Dylan, because at a very young age he's doing it too. Again, totally different persona, totally different personality, but I mean the two of you guys and a couple of the other young guys that I've run into give me some kind of hope, and not just because you seem to agree with me on every single thing, Chris, but but just the fact that you're thinking for yourself, you're not accepting, look, here is your, daily bread, Mr. Slave, and well, shouldn't even call you Mr. Slave, because generally speaking, from their perspective, what are you but one of the useless animals that's out there consuming resources, just like me and just like anybody who's listening to this show, with the exception maybe of somebody who's, at the NSA passing along some of the stuff, which, thank you guys for listening as well. But I'm sorry, I make backhanded jokes every once in a while, and I wanted to give you a chance to breathe too. This is the way I do things, but like I said, I just go off the top of my head, and it's just whatever it is that comes from my heart most of the time. My heart and my brain, usually they're not working together, but one or the other is controlling my mouth at one time, so this is what you get. So, and it sounds to me like you're doing the same thing. Now, you did start to touch on Jade Helm, and I got a message on Skype which told me that I cut you off and didn't let you talk about Jade Helm. So I want to give you a chance to do that, to discuss what your basic understanding of that is, and and where you stand on that whole thing. Because to be honest with you, I'm at this point now where I'm seeing other things going on in conjunction with it, and I think that we have yet to really see what the true agenda is of this whole thing. I don't believe that they're going to try and put us in FEMA camps right away, because that might involve having to either dispose of us or having to maintain us, as individuals and all that. So I'm not going along for the whole we round it up right away thing. But at the same time, crowd control is definitely something that's on their mind, and I think it could be a lot worse than even getting stuck in the, sorry to use the term, concentration camps, but quite literally, that's what you're talking about when you're talking about this kind of stuff. And I don't mean you, Chris. I mean a lot of the people out there that are speculating. It's a lot more speculation without consideration right now. It is something that I do find alarming. And well, hell, I'll just let you speak about it. So go ahead and tell us what your views are on the whole Jade Helm thing.
Well, Operation Jade Helm, it seems like it's seems like kind of, what it is just a preparation for martial law, which, it's funny that they're exercising at the same time that, we're weeks possibly away from a third world war, and not even an exaggeration, as a direct United States-Iranian conflict is about to could open up, and that would involve Syria, Iran, possibly the Houthis in Yemen, who are actually, it's funny they call them the rebels, and they're actually the ones, they're actually the legitimate in power. Okay, so Yemen, versus, of course, the axis of evil, United States, Saudi Arabia, Israel, will definitely all be on the same, side of, and screw all that, stupid stuff that people act like there's been a legitimate rift between Obama and Israel. Obama is still allowing aid to go there, while Detroit looks like a city out of Syria, looks like Damascus after being bombed is what Detroit looks like right now, falling apart. Israel, a thriving country, is getting $11 million a day now of our taxpayer money is going to Israel, so they can continue to massacre the Palestinian people. So it's not true that there's a rift between Obama and Israel. It's a game. It's keep you distracted, because that of course gets all the people all fired up and emotional. It's like because everybody became it's so politically correct to support Israel nowadays. But anyways, getting off topic, what Jade Helm is. Jade Helm is martial law exercises going on in the Southwest, mostly of the United States. And also, if you notice something, because it directly affects my city, in my state of Florida, is that here in Florida, you must see that their General Electric, a mega corporation, is helping, has been subcontracted by the United States government to put up these smart lights. Smart lights are technically, a little bit more energy efficient. However, the health side effects of what these LED lights are do not account for what energy is being saved. These things cause thyroid problems, melanoma, eye problems, and it affects the circadian rhythm. But well, the main thing also is that these things have cameras on them that can be, and they're all connected on a grid with the internet, and they can relay information in real time back to other streetlights and then back to the General Electric Center. And the United States government at any time can use General Electric's footage. So, for instance, the government has just installed cameras all over the place in Florida. I'm assuming also in other places. There's Charlotte that got these new lights. I mean, also they're just a bastard. I mean, I don't really like the entire town being so lit up. I mean, the entire town here where I am, it's just like you're walking, down the street, and it's almost like you're inside at a mall or something. It's that bright down on the street.
Right. Well,
Chris,
Chris, I'll tell you something though. I urge you to consider what I have had to come to regarding the whole surveillance state thing, and that's this. I assume at no point in time that I have any privacy. I assume at all points in time that I am being surveilled, and everything and everywhere is being surveilled. I have given up on the notion that there is any sort of thing, such as privacy any longer. There are cities all over the place where this kind of thing is going on all over the country. This may be new to your area, but everywhere that I have talked to people, everywhere that I've been, this is the case. And not only from the governmental actions with the larger corporate interests, but even the independent contractors who have fed into this giant grid of surveillance themselves. I mean, look, you go into a convenience store. Do you think that those cameras, which are there, allegedly to help them catch robbers and things, are not also accessible by, intelligence assets, are not also accessible by governments, regardless of whatever independent contractor happened to install them or service them or anything else? They're all accessible and integrated into a greater system. And you also have, all sorts of appliances that can communicate with each other. I mean, hell, your refrigerator can tell your cable box when the last time you had something to eat was. This is, I mean, and it sounds funny, doesn't it? And don't forget, with your Xbox or your PlayStation or whatever else, those appliances also talk to your TV, also talk to your computer. So I assume that there is no point in time that I'm not under surveillance. And I don't think anybody else should either. What do you think of that?
Well, and what it reminds me of, a book that was written by, one of my favorite authors. This guy fought the Spanish Civil War. I think honestly that this guy was a badass. George Orwell wrote a book called 1984 that every teenager should really read. Instead of looking up the Sparks notes when they have to do a book report about it. If they don't give that book anymore because they know that the people would be like, wait a minute, that kind of sounds like the NSA that I heard about on in the Snowden stuff. Everything's being...
You got it. If you take Brave New World, okay, another interesting book. If you take Brave New World and combine it with 1984, guess what you have? Reality. This is where we're at. Okay, this is what I always say. You got to put the two together, though. You understand? Because you got the drug state, you have the acquiescence of the public, you have the Big Brother control, you have the Big Brother surveillance, you have the by extension or by direct control of everything from breeding to eating to everything else. All of these things have now become a reality, either directly or by extension. And don't forget Orwell. That's not his real name. You know that whole story too, right?
Well, what was his real name again?
Eric Blair.
Okay.
Yeah. British intelligence guy, Eric Blair. But every once in a while they do give us a little bit of truth. They told us what the blueprint was in advance when it came to that. But I'm sorry, I know I took you off topic, but I wanted you to consider that because that's one of those realities that I'm trying to impart to everybody. Is that if you're under this illusion that you're going to not, that you're going to somehow avoid the surveillance state, that is a misnomer. It's gone. Forget it. If you have any sort of electronics, if you're anywhere near people, if you have to utilize a store, if you wind up using, anything that is even remotely electronically integrated, even a debit card, you're screwed, man. You're under the surveillance system. That's it. Done. I don't know. It's like some people are very resistant to that concept. That is the reality of it. I'm not saying that we need to accept it, but we need to accept that that is the case. A way to fight back against it, I don't have that solution in my back pocket, but it's part of the reality. Now, with Jade Helm, though, we're talking about infiltration, which is something that they do, as a matter of training when it comes to training intelligence operatives all over the country. If you talk to anybody who's living in the proximity of any of these places where they train these guys, they always infiltrate them into the local communities as a practice exercise to get them ready for doing that kind of thing. Now, they'll be given specialized training, learn how to deal with languages and have cultural adjustments and things like that, or they'll utilize, people that have particular ethnic backgrounds, like somebody like yourself, let's just say, because you identified yourself as Hispanic. If you can speak Spanish, they'll either make sure that your Spanish is better or make sure that you speak, what do you call that? Whatever it is, and it's not Spanish a lot in South America. They speak other languages, but the point is that they'll make sure that you're able to speak that one of those languages even better. They'll take a guy like you and tell you how to blend in with that culturally. You'll get special training afterwards, but they first do it by having you do it in the United States, and those communities that are in close proximity to those facilities are familiar with that. But this Jade Helm thing, and at the same time reports all over the country. I mean, I'm in North Carolina, and we're seeing these white buses that have no markings but government plates being massed together, which to me looks like, gee, what is it you need to carry in buses? Usually people. So are we carrying, prisoners, or are we carrying, intel guys, or are we carrying, SWAT teams? What are we carrying in the blacked out windows of the unmarked white buses? I'm wondering why they're being massed together. And these types of reports are coming across all over the country, but it's just the one closest to me, so I notice it, But the thing is, Jade Helm in and of itself, what is it that you think in consideration of all of this? How are you coming down, or are you still kind of undecided about what it really means like I am?
I'm actually pretty certain of what this really means. It's the martial law exercises. They know that they're going to install the military junta very soon. They've been moving towards this for a long time. It's the natural progression of, fascism into ultra-fascism. We've already been at fascism, but now we're about to reach, Pinochet level, Hitler level fascism, where it's the military on every street corner. They got us all locked down. Nobody's in and out of the country, leaving the country without special permission that they'll probably issue. Will be treason. They're going to have, they might not round everyone up at the same time, but I think they're going to do it incrementally. They've already started. People think that FEMA camps is a thing of the future. It's already started with homeless people. I think with South Carolina, I think. In South Carolina, they had, people were being moved out of Columbia to these, reports to these FEMA residential centers. They had an option. It was either jail or to these camps. That's pretty much what they describe sounds like the FEMA camps that are documented to have been built. It's not a myth that FEMA camps exist. It's a reality. It's in the bills. And people say, "Oh, you're just being a conspiracy theorist. You're all paranoid." I'm like, I guess if I guess they're the ones, the politicians are conspiracy theorists, or are just having a fun time if they're just putting this stuff up. If they think, because they apparently think FEMA camps are real. In fact, they made bills to have FEMA camps. In issue, they had that Res 645. That was in one of the bills, and then, of course, it started off with Rex 84 was really the start of it all.
Right.
And you can ask. It actually started really with immigration. And way back in the day. Plan on putting immigrants in the camps, and then later evolved into putting dissidents in the camps. But they're going to call them terrorist threats, and that's how they're going to label it when it finally starts. They're probably going to, the fact that I connect Operation Jade Helm directly to what's going on in the Middle East, because the day World War III starts is the day martial law starts. And they're probably going to have a big trigger event like 9/11, because there's all the evidence shows that. It's the funny thing is that, if you really watch the real news, the alternative media, or if you look at foreign media, coming from, people would say that, oh, that's just Ayatollah's propaganda Iran. However, it seems like that stuff is really applicable to what's going on some of those news, like Press TV or Fars News, or if you go to Russia and you have RT, which RT has been very, very credible, it seems like. And one thing that they talked about is that they hinted at. They were like talking about, they were talking about how Dick Cheney was prognosticating another terror event worse than 9/11, stuff like that. And then they were mentioning, Dick Cheney also prognosticated 9/11 happening in the spring of 2001. He predicted the events of September 11th. So they mentioned his prognostication of, that event, and they were pretty much alluding that, the United States government was involved in 9/11 and was also going to be involved with this future event. And also, right. Benjamin Netanyahu also, alluded to this happening. He predicted New York will be attacked in 3 to 4 years. He didn't really give if or what happens. He just said that in 3 to 4 years New York will be attacked. So it seems like it's like all over again, the same,
Right. Prognostication is nonsense because, that's akin to being a psychic, and you don't have to be a psychic if you know what the agenda is and you know what the plans are. So there you go. That's the bottom line on that. And I think that, as I said before, I do think it is correct. And, of course, we do know about the FEMA camps. Those are a reality. They have been given various, purposings for what it is, that they're going to do and et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is I think that that's a very small number in the population that's going to end up there. I'm wondering if it's going to be, people like you and me, those of us who are willing to say something against the government and things like that. I'm wondering if it's going to really be for the dissidents or if it's going to be for something else. The importation of, the actual, new wave of brown shirts, as it were. I'm wondering what it's going to be for. But I think it plays a part of it. Martial law, I don't know if they could get away with pulling that one off. And I still say, and this is one of the weird predictions that I still feel confident about, and that is that we will not see World War III be actually, an acceptable a viewpoint about the condition of the world until we see the real ignition on the continent of Africa. I think this has to involve the continent of Africa in order to really have it be declared a global war. And that speaks terribly for the fact that, of course, we have actually been hit on our own land, as to who the actual terrorists were. We disagree with the mainstream here, but we do accept that there was a terrorist attack. It's just I'm not buying that it was, a guy in an Afghani cave, controlling people by satellite phone who happened to have also been Saudi Arabians mostly. That turns out a lot of them weren't actually dead after the attacks. No, I'm not buying that that's who the terrorists are. I'm sorry. I do buy that they might have had something to do with it because, after all, they were on our payroll. Yeah. Anyway, the last couple of minutes here, Chris, we're down to, say, 2 minutes. So I want to give you, a final word, and I know I sort of cut you off again, but we ran out of time just like that. That was 2 hours. Can you believe it?
I know. It happens all the time on radio. It's a weird effect. It's just like time flies by. It's like the first time. It's funny. The first time I was going to do radio, I was like, oh, man, I'm never going to have enough stuff to say. This is an hour and a half or something like that. And the thing is that I had so much stuff to say. I was kind of pissed that the show was ending. I was like, what? It's over already. I still had so much to say, and then I realized that actually radio, time just flies by. 3 hours, which is the max on Blog Talk Radio. That's when after 3 hours passes by, it happens pretty easily. It's happened to me a couple times, and it's especially easier when you have somebody to talk to. 3 hours is a little bit hard to fill in when you're going solo, which I've gotten pretty close to doing before. I went solo for 2 hours, I think. No callers, nothing. Just 2 hours of my monologue, and I personally don't like doing monologue because you go off on tangents and then no one's there to stop you, and all of a sudden you really start to go all over the place. I kind of like having a co-host to keep me on a certain topic because I'll literally go all over the place and talk about any topic. It's kind of just, my stream of consciousness. But
Right.
You know, it was really
well
great.
listen, my bumper's going to jump in. I agree with you. It is a lot harder to fill those 2-3 hours by yourself, but I've done it too. And yeah, you don't quite get to everything you want to get to, but that's why you keep doing more and more shows and you don't just do one. And I want to thank everybody who decided to tune in tonight for the Ochelli Effect here on UCY.tv. And again, thanks to my guest tonight, Chris Jackson Rojas. Hopefully, it is pronounced Rojas, right?
Yeah, you actually got it perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you for once. See, I can occasionally get a name right, guys. And I didn't even stutter or stammer too much tonight. So, you know, you guys can get on me on Saturday if you want. Anyway.